I think you just explained to me why the Epoch Times has been so successful lately.
Explain.
I think we're kind of doing what these two illustrious, penny charging individuals did back in the day. Because our media is not for the elites, although there's some elites that follow it. When I came in here, the bartender looked at me and said, "American thought leaders. Oh, thanks so much for what you do."
That's
right?
amazing.
I was touched and I was honored by that. But anyway,
that's amazing. What an endorsement. Wow.
Bartenders, right?
Seriously.
No, and frankly, that happens a lot. And I feel very honored that that's the case, right? But I never thought about it the way you just described, right? Until reading your book.
Tell me more about how you do that. Like, what steps you take to ensure that your audience includes working class Americans, because that's what I want to hear about. That's what nobody else is doing.
Listen, so the weird thing, I feel a little bit odd about the Epoch Times' recent success, because I feel like we're just doing what I understand journalism is supposed to do, which is reporting. I think in the intro, in one of the endorsements, Greg Lukianoff mentions this, right? He says something like, journalism has become a field where people are kind of shaping reality for others, or something to this tune, and that your book kind of explains that a little bit, whereas we don't do that, right? Our opinion is our opinion, journalism is journalism. But so few people are doing that, right? And that's what I see since you're interviewing me now for a moment. So I feel like there's this huge, let's call it a market, that's open for anybody who wants to do actual journalism. Well, we welcome that. Competition is healthy, right? But part of our success is simply because there's been an abdication of that role by the most illustrious media of our day, apparently.
Well, to me, what's really interesting is seeing that very often it's the conservative press that has the working class audience these days, that's catering to a viewer or a listener or a reader who they are imagining who doesn't have a college degree, whereas the vast majority of liberal media that's being produced is being produced for an ever smaller elite, an ever more highly educated elite. And I think that reflects political trends more widely, where if the Democrats used to be the party of the welders, and the lineman, right, and the factory worker, today they're the party asking those people to pay off the student loans of, dentists and accountants to the tune of $50,000, right? That's what the progressives are pushing, $50,000 in student loans, right? Who has $50,000 in student loans? It's not the linemen, right? Or they're pushing banning fracking, one of the few jobs left that creates upward mobility for working class Americans in the name of this sort of climate agenda. Or they're pushing defunding the police. I mean, who needs the police? It's working class people of color, the victims of crime, right? The victims of skyrocketing murder. And so I argue that the woke language, although it sounds like social justice, it's essentially an abandonment of the most vulnerable people of color, the most vulnerable Americans, the downwardly mobile, in the name of a social justice war that literally puts money in the pockets of liberal elites. And I'm saying this from the left, like I'm coming at this, I'm a left-wing populist, and I feel so disgusted with this, like with the magic trick that so many liberal journalists have been able to play on themselves, where they can literally stand there and ask working class people to pay off the student loans of the elites, right? Where they can literally, with a straight face, say, we're going to defund the police on behalf of people of color, the victims of the vast majority of homicides in America. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Absolutely fascinating. And I think that, your book isn't just about, I guess, the failure of journalism, which is what it's speaking to, or the wokening of journalism, but also about, exactly the kinds of realities that you're talking about here. There's so many of these pieces that are kind of interconnected here. So how exactly did this journalistic profession take on the woke agenda, for lack of a better term? Because it's not something that was obvious, at least to me, until maybe five years ago, I think is the time when I really noticed it.
It's a great question. I want to just start by defining a little better what I mean by the woke agenda, because it is an agenda. But to me, police reform is not woke.
One would hope, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
But there is a woke variant of it.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
I think that's really important to point out, because conservatives know this, okay? Conservatives know that conservatives want police reform, right? Conservatives know that conservatives are worried about homelessness, right? Conservatives know that conservatives are worried about black school children in Baltimore in failing schools who have a GPA of 1.0, right? Conservatives know that they care about that. Liberals don't know that. So I have to be very clear when I say what is wokeness. To me, wokeness is the rebranding of racism away from actually caring about people of color, actually paying attention to the population we have most abandoned in this nation, the descendants of slaves. Like, it's rebranding caring about those people to a symbolic fight over whether America is a white supremacy, which does nothing to help people of color, right? Endless conversations about critical race theory, endless conversations about, if you're not anti-racist, you're racist, creating a binary where if you're not talking about race in every conversation, you are contributing to the problem, you are a racist. That's wokeness, is when it comes away from the populations that we have actually abandoned and becomes, contributing to an elite agenda that actually obfuscates the solutions to the real problems. So how did the media get woke? So, like many things, it was gradual and then all at once, right? So the status revolution among journalists took about 100 years to complete itself, till 2015. At the same time, the media had taken on a more interpretive feel to it with the advent of television. So in 1964, that was the first year most Americans were getting their news from TV, and what that meant was that print journalists, they had to add something to have a value add, right? They couldn't just tell you what had happened because people could turn on the TV and get that in a more immediate sense. And so the news took on a more interpretive cast to it. There was still about, 20, 30 years in the post-war era where a lot of the news was bipartisan, straight down the middle of the road. But I think that was more for class reasons than political reasons. It was because there was less that divided us by class. The working class was very, very highly mobile, so there was not that much that distinguished them from the middle class. You didn't have CEOs of corporations making 30 times what they paid their workers. You had a more equitable, a more just society from an economic point of view. Now, we were still struggling with Jim Crow and the after effects of it, a struggle that does still continue today. But from an economic point of view, we were less divided by class, and I believe that's why Americans from both sides of the aisle could tune into Walter Cronkite. Right? It was less about political polarization. What's happened is we have now a deep class chasm in America. And especially over the last 20 years, the economy has started to reward those who work in knowledge industries much, 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 much more than it once did. And it's started to really be punitive towards the working class and people without a college degree. So even 20 or 30 years ago, a journalist or a college professor would live in a neighborhood where they would live next door to an electrician, and they wouldn't make that much more than the electrician. Today, they live in Park Slope, and they make a little bit less than their neighbor, the corporate lawyer. Right? There's been this class shift, and the upward mobility of the meritocratic, liberal, highly educated elite has been very, very, very extreme, to where the American intelligentsia today is very affluent compared to those without a college degree. And so their agenda increasingly focuses on what those people want. Now, what we can see, and we can really track this, is how digital media took a journalistic industry that was increasingly focused on a highly educated liberal elite and really turned that focus into a moral panic around race. This started to happen a lot earlier than most people think. It started around 2011, 2012, and we know when it started because we don't have to rely on our own impressions. Sociologists have gone to the New York Times and the Washington Post and NPR and even the Wall Street Journal, and they've trawled the archives.